there's relevant information that is provided by the citizenry and also integrated with government data that can drive citizen participation in making sure that the solutions that are being created are really sustainable, right? If you don't understand the habits of your citizens, if you don't understand how they actually would like to engage and interact, if you don't understand their lifestyles and their patterns, then it's really, really hard to actually build solutions that are truly smart and that will truly achieve these, transformative types of impact that the previous speakers have talked about. So I think data really in terms of smart city development and citizen engagement is sort of the foundation, right? And I think that we really need to also focus on investing in our human capital so that we have the right type of talent to actually first of all, build data collection solutions, but then also process the data into insights. Thank you.
Sorry, we got muted. Yes. So data is a very important part of having a smart city, because you gather data, you provide insights through data, and you can use data in so many different ways that the examples we've already given that can improve the lives of citizens. But I guess the question, and this is a question to all the panelists in terms of what your thoughts are on this, what does Lagos State need to do differently about data? Is it that the data is already available, but then we haven't started to play it back in insights? Or is there a different approach that needs to happen? Because I think in terms of the building blocks, what are the issues with data that we see today? Alexander wants to speak. Okay. Can you unmute yourself? I think. Oh, you can't. So organizers, can you?
Okay, there we go.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I kept hitting unmute.
Yes,
okay. Persistence is rewarded, right? So as we look at data and Lagos, it's a combination of three things here. One is infrastructure, and that the ubiquitous data infrastructure. By that, I really mean that data, whether it's mobile or broadband, is affordable throughout, and that people can use it at a bandwidth that enables them to do things like participate in this conference, right? Or have their kids participate in school programs. So you need that data available, because that's the building block. Secondly, there's then partnerships around using the data. Right? It's not just about the government. It's not just about the private sector. It's not just about the social sector. There needs to be a common understanding of what are the challenges to solve and what are the data that are either could be available or could be created to solve those problems. And then that brings to actually the data skills themselves, right? And what are the skills inside government? What are the skills outside government? What are the skills that are building in the next generation to leverage data? What's really exciting right now from the smart cities perspective. Oh, there we go. Okay. So what's really exciting right now from the smart cities perspective, I think, is there are a number of tools that are radically lowering the barrier to entry from a data skills perspective. I mean, these low code and no code platforms that work, for example, in Washington, DC at the beginning of the COVID epidemic, they were able to roll out a rapid response portal in a matter of days using a no-code platform called Uncork that just enabled them to create a fully functioning web app in a matter of days without a crazy amount of coding, right, or a crazy team coming in. So, and these are the things that could be available. There are also machine learning systems on demand. There's VR and AR systems on demand like that that are able to work at a lower code level. So then where did the data come from? This is where you need to be really clever, really scrappy, and bootstrap. The data are there. We just need to make sure we're sucking it up, right? In a way that is respecting people's privacy and using it responsibly and fairly. So for example, wherever there's a vehicle that's moving, there's a potential GPS device there, right? So that means that every vehicle could be telling us about what's actually happening with the traffic right now if we just allowed those to tell us about what's going on. Anytime someone was out crossing a street, that's a chance to say if the lights are there, if there's the street quality is there, and we can be bringing those data in. There are things like looking at, are the street lights working, right? And are they working the way they have? Well, you know what? There's people all over the city who can just look there and tell. And so we just need to open up and listen to them in a way that those data then become part of the system. And this is where the smart cities get so good at about really using your ears and creating ways to hear what's happening so that we're not requiring to go out and put massive sensors everywhere. Yes, sensors are great, but we have people, right? And so how do we use those people in a way that's really going to help us learn and create these smart environments?
Great, thank you, Alexander. So I guess with data, it's already there, it just needs to be configured and it needs to be drawn down essentially. So let's pivot to a point that you made, and that is around infrastructure. And I'd like to turn to Alan for this.
Sorry, do you mind? I want to put a caveat on all what we're saying about data, if you don't mind. You know, there are different types of data, and I want to bring our attention to user-generated data, which again, we have to talk about the veracity of that data. And I think someone like Alan in his business would sort of can tell you about the nightmares in terms of cleaning up the SIMREG database or something or the other. So we need to be mindful that data is nice when it is system generated or machine generated, yes, but when it's user generated and users don't appreciate the value of data, then we're going to run into significant problems. The other thing for us to think about is, as managers, do we absorb and use data? Are we data oriented? And I'll give you an example. Ask someone a question of how many? And they'll just tell you, oh, many, right? And so the things that make data mining or data analysis interesting, because if we don't even have the specifics, then you just realize that we're just going to be faffing around and we can't do the behavioral insights that Alexander was talking about and build specific solutions. Thank you.
No, that's great. And Alan, you have your work cut out. So you need to tell us about the unintended consequences of data as well as how data plays into the whole smart city space.
Okay. Well, first of all, good morning to everybody, panelists and attendees. Grateful for the chance to be here and to talk at this event. And frankly, also, I think it's worth commending the Lagos State government for both organising this and also for their commitment to being a driving force for change and innovation. I think that's very laudable. To talk to the point of the data itself, data and data mining. Mining has a really good word, is a really good word there, because mining and minefields are quite closely aligned in that context, because yes, human data and data that's passed, the veracity of that data is extremely hard to validate, and you have to be very careful with it. So machine-fed data generally is much more reliable and useful. Certainly in the early stages, you know, we were talking about the building blocks of smart cities and so on, and I think it's an evolution. And over time, you can get certainly far more creative about where your data sources are coming from. But in the early stages, I think I would caution more that we take it a step at a time. I know one of the points you wanted me to talk about as well was telecommunications itself. Telecoms is really the underlying infrastructure for a smart city. And it's not just, as we've just spoken about, the telecoms networks, the communication infrastructure. It's also about the information itself and the data. And I guess it's a cohesive set of ICT, information communication technology, big data that's effectively necessarily to sustain and manage everything from things like transport, security, right the way through to use of energy or water resources, public spaces, you know, And critically, the communication with the city's inhabitants itself. What we're talking about here is things to better manage resources. One of the other panelists, I think, has already mentioned that, Lagos is going to be one of the mega cities of the future. I believe studies say that it will triple in size by 2050. So we could be looking at over 60 million people in a greater Lagos area. So that's a huge and a monumental undertaking for any city planner and government official to how are they going to better manage their resources for delivering public services effectively for the people, because I think that's the most important point here. It is about how do we improve people's everyday lives by effectively using technology. But there's very clear challenges in creating the necessary smart infrastructure to deliver that. The most defining fundamental is connectivity itself. A city can only be smart if operational decisions are made automatically in time-critical fashion, based on data and sensor insights. But that means that a city first requires a level of connectivity between the users, which are the citizens, the service providers, such as utility companies, private businesses, and then the decision makers, which are the government bodies. But in parallel with all of that, it needs the technical infrastructure, such as that's provided through large-scale data centers and servers and storage solutions that's needed to power all of this. So I guess obviously telecommunications companies like mine, Nine Mobile, plays a crucial role in delivering all of that. The technical and the tech and communications infrastructure for the smart city development. And going back to the earlier point around staging and evolution, connectivity is basically the foundation of any smart city ecosystem. And if we're talking about the journey that we need to go through to support the government achieve its smart city goals, then there are some basic things that we need to address as well, which is around, how do we support, how does the government support reduce issues around, right-of-way constraints and other inhibitors to the deployment of infrastructure, such as city permits, etc. So that effectively telecommunications companies themselves can then empower the smart city, both directly for their own business purposes, but also as part of partnerships between government and private businesses. I suppose the bottom line is, collaboration. Collaboration is needed between government bodies, telecom companies, etc. Because I can't help but stress it enough. Obviously, ease of access and deployment of infrastructure is key to the timely delivery of all of this. But if I go back to the points around data, the other thing that as a telecom operator, we're very fortunate to be custodians of what everyone's talking about and calling big data. We have insights around what our consumers and business are effectively doing on our networks, which puts us in a very viable position to partner with the government to design the necessary infrastructure and processes that are efficient and cost effective. So, we can provide fixed connectivity such as fiber, as well as fixed wireless, mobile wireless broadband, and, all of the access points to the delivery of smart city solutions, and some examples and use cases have already been mentioned, but, automating street lighting, building lighting, home lighting, calling systems for homes and offices, security monitoring, from the standpoint of physical security, even down to, which is quite, I know you wanted me to mention this, which is around, the bleak dystopian future as well of civil liberties being transgressed around facial recognition, security monitoring through CCTV. But whilst there are some negatives to that, there's obviously huge positives that come from the implementation of all of these things, not just to making people's everyday lives better, but also to improving the planet and, as regards energy efficiency, reducing CO2 emissions. So there's huge things that smart cities are going to be able to support. And I guess if I was to sum up, I think, again, telecoms is the foundation to it, but it's necessary to also mention, whilst telecoms supports digital inclusion and transformation, It's also very, very needed for financial inclusion too, because without this, if you're not financially included, and with the likes and the growth around, you know, electronic money and e-wallets and all of the cashless society that we're heading towards, without financial inclusion, you're going to be excluded from this. And that takes me back to kind of a final point around why is it all being done? And it's being done for the benefit of the people. So I think as a, you know, a passing point in the design of future smart cities, planners must carefully consider ensuring that everyone benefits, that everybody is included in this, what could be, you know, a fantastic journey in improving people's lives. Thank you.
Great. No, I think those are excellent points. And on the point of that you ended in terms of financial inclusion and making sure that everyone benefits from the Smart City initiative, because at the end of the day, you want to ensure that it's far-reaching. To what extent do you think public Wi-Fi, for example, enables the financial or the inclusion, basically? Because at the end of the day, if you want services to then end up for payments, you want to make sure that everyone has the ability to pay. But what role do you think that?
I think, sorry to interrupt you, I was going to say Wi-Fi is just a technology, it's just another access point. I wouldn't focus on Wi-Fi itself. If one of the benefits of Wi-Fi is it uses unlicensed spectrum, so unlicensed in the sense that it's freely available to everybody, telecoms companies, individuals, any business. So that's a key benefit. But interestingly, Nigeria is one of the most liberal countries in Africa in the sense of how much spectrum it has allocated to telecoms companies. Equally though, one of the burdens or one of the small problems that needs to be addressed is that so much of that spectrum is in the hands of people that are not deploying it. So it needs to be reallocated because spectrum is a scarce resource. It belongs to the people, to the nation as a whole. So, you know, it should be being deployed for, or allocated, I should say, so it could be deployed for everyone's use. Because, as I said, I wouldn't draw this down onto whether Wi-Fi is important, 4G, LTE plus, or whether it's the new 5G. Let's forget technology for the moment or the buzzwords. It's all about communications and, you know, effectively enabling people through their handsets, their devices. And, you know, let's go back to the dystopian future of where we're all chipped and actually we don't even need a handset anymore because we'll all have little devices that will, you know, produce small screens in the air that we'll all be able to tap and so forth. So I think, you know, to me, comms is the issue here. Wi-Fi, yeah, it's a building block. It will enable things, but I wouldn't say it was anything that was, you know, hugely important. All telecom companies have access to infrastructure and can deploy infrastructure as long as governments help reduce the hurdles to being able to deploy it. But also, you know, putting a commercial hat on here as well, you know, looking very much around how our communications companies treated. You know, we provide critical national infrastructure, and I think that's another really important point to mention. There should be legislation introduced around making sure infrastructure such as ours is available. I know many people in Lagos and surrounds will be saying, you know, but you telcos, there's always outages and problems. But, you know, in some cases, yes, it's our fault, and I'll put my hand up to that. But in other cases, you know, everybody wants new roads built. Well, unfortunately, when they're building roads, they're cutting up all our fiber that we've deployed, you know, which is bringing down our networks, you know. So attention to what is critical national infrastructure is another important element. It's one of the building blocks to making sure that we can deploy seamless connectivity that's always available when it's needed.
Great. So thanks, Alan. So it brings me to a slightly different point under the same infrastructure heading. And I'd like to bring in Yinka on this point in terms of, and I think you were already alluding to it, Alan, the whole ecosystem is not just one thing. You know, there's the telcos, there's the communication, there's the power. What's the ecosystem that we've got to think about for a smart city initiative? Yinka, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, thanks, Veracity. And I can you unmute me? Can you unmute? Okay, am I unmuted now?
We can't hear you, Yinka. Can you please?
Can you? Okay, great. Okay, I've been unmuted. So generally, I think that if we go back to what Alexander started us with, it's really the people at the center. And how do we ensure that focus on that core, we build out the ecosystem around that core. So one of the key things we need to also think about is the different levels of infrastructure required. So Alan will talk about the hard infrastructure, telco, power, and all those hard things we need to move around. But there's also the soft infrastructure, which is the people side. And the people side is looking at both the supply and the demand side of these things as well. So we need to think about what's the whole value chain and supply chain? How do we ensure that we have the right levels of talent to, to absorb a smart city and to maintain a smart city? Because one thing I know about technology is that it breaks. All right, so it's not something that you fix on one day and then it stays working for the rest of its lifetime. It breaks. So how do we ensure that within our own digital ecosystems, we're building the right talent that can understand how do we do power monitoring, how do we repair components, how do we diagnose components, and that's the whole service and maintenance culture that we need to have along with it. So you're not just sort of shooting, and I'll give you an example of many years ago, cars became a bit more digitally enabled, so you needed machines to sort of connect to the cars to do the diagnostic work and things like that. But then again, I remember a time when Toyota now started educating and all their mechanics to upskill them to this level. How do we do that across the ecosystem? Because you see, we're not just building a smart city in isolation or isolating one community versus the other. We're building a whole smart state with more smart people who can work across industries as well. So when we think about Africa being borderless now, right? So we can actually export some of this talent as well, but it's really the upskilling to ensure that there's the whole, there's harmony in the ecosystem, because when one side of the ecosystem is working and the other isn't, it's just going to break down. So we need to be looking at all the different aspects and ensure that we join all the dots to make sure that we can actually maintain and sustain a smart city, and then it's available to everybody inclusively. Thank you, Iriti. Please, can you unmute all of the speakers? No, you've muted them again.
Thank you. If you can just keep all the speakers unmuted, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. So in terms of human capital, that's a great part and a very important part of the smart city ecosystem. And I'd like all the panelists to comment on this because you need the innovation as well, and you need the sustainability around that. So Yemi, what are your thoughts on the human capital aspect of the smart city?
All right, sorry, I've been unmuted again. So yes, I think that's a fantastic question. So I think one critical aspect to achieving smart cities is certainly investment in human and social capital. So the human capital aspect, of digital transformation is certainly it is definitely a critical aspect. The talent is key to economic growth, also key to sustainability as well, and also that quality of life point that we made much earlier. It is interesting though, and I think one of the panelists kind of sort of touched on this, is when we hear digital transformation, we automatically draw inferences to maybe the actual technology or the exponential tech, but obviously it definitely goes beyond that. In the context of smart cities, or in terms of future-proofing our current state, I would say, talent of today and for the future, especially in the context of smart cities, will be focused on enhancing citizens' experience. So, and I think this, intersection of what I call the 3Ds, right? So that's data, that's digital, and human-centered design. So how do we design an environment where we can all thrive, in the midst of interacting with a lot of technology, and also operating and living in a city that is sort of built a little bit differently than what we're all used to. So, and I know we've talked about data. We've kind of talked about adopting and using like a lot of these digital technologies. But I think the human-centered design aspect is essentially critical. Now, in terms of talent, though, there's clearly a whole lot that we can do, and I think this is where, you know, businesses in terms of the private sector and the public sector needs to come together in terms of how do we drive sort of a more enriched environment that where actual talent can thrive. And I think the education aspect comes into play. I think one of the attendees has actually put a question out that I think is actually very interesting and actually challenges sort of the conventional wisdom, challenges us as a business community, and I think challenges even the government as well, is education is key. Education is a critical aspect of this whole talent conversation that I think is critical to a thriving smart city.
So education is great, and I'd like to also explore other aspects of talent, such as knowledge transfer, the role of hubs. So Alexander, please, your thoughts. Can he be unmuted, please? Can Alexander be unmuted, please?
I was going to mention one before we get to Alexander.
While Alexander's being unmuted, Alan, please go ahead.
Go ahead then.
Building towards the answer, the question you just raised, I want to hone in on 3 specific skill areas, and I think 2 might be obvious and 1 might be a little controversial. One is the skills to tell stories with data, right? And this is whether that's visualization, whether that's Excel, it's about being comfortable using data to tell a story about where the congestion is happening, or where the street lights need to be changed, right? And that is a piece that certainly can be taught in a formal university setting. It's also something that can be done in a lot of coaching on the job. If you have someone who's numerate and comfortable, a lot of the skills you develop here, people get them by spending time online, figuring it out and just like doing it, and working in an environment where that's encouraged, where they're given the leeway to figure it out, to learn and explore and to improve their own skills. So I'd say one is that data storytelling, which is so critical to make whatever data is being collected now useful. So that's one. Second is around this mid-career skill set that's technical, right? It's a mixture of technical skills and product business skills, entrepreneurial mindset, right? And if you've invested in startups, but they can't hire the growth managers to take it to the next level, you're not going to see the local wealth building that the investment in the startups have, right? And a lot of this talent comes from mentoring, right? Part of it is education, part of it is salary, part of it, those things, but part of it is also just mentoring and creating a place where people feel nurtured in their careers and want to continue to invest professionally in this. And so that's the second one, is that mid-career talent. And so this third one, I hope this one isn't controversial, but I think as we're getting to a no-code, low-code environment, there's actually an even greater pressure on just basic literacy, right? And that basic literacy can actually, with no-code tools, become digital skills, right? And so that means that people need to be super comfortable in the written format and be super comfortable in the number format, and those skills then can leapfrog into smart city skills.
Irati is muted. Can someone unmute her, please? Okay, maybe I'll just go ahead and just add until Irati is muted.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I think that there's also, in terms of capacity development, there's one part that we haven't really touched on, which is capacity development within the public sector, right? There's a lot of upskilling that is required there. And I think that, to Alexander's point, that mentoring also applies there, right? And it might be called reverse mentoring, where you have younger people coming in to mentor people who are more seasoned, more experienced, and who are the actual decision makers, to ensure that they really understand the correlation between data and the work that they do, and the mandate that they have as government. And I think that this is really, really important, because what I've seen a lot of the time is that there's a high level understanding, but there's not an in-depth understanding. And in order to really be able to push the agenda and to ensure that the right decisions are made, you do need a much deeper understanding. I also think that we need to start looking at what are the jobs of the future that this smart city is going to be requiring, right? And then start building a sustainable talent pipeline towards that, right? And whether this is with conventional education or unconventional, more maybe models that sort of are similar to more of like vocational training or on-the-job experience. But I do think that it's important to actually know what are the needs that we actually have, right? And then start really using data to track that and ensuring that we're building the right talent. Because we can have this fantastic plan, but if we don't have the talent to actually execute, then nothing is going to really happen. And I think that a lot of that can also happen with partnerships and collaborations with the private sector, especially with the technology industry, and really looking at what are the technology companies that are already building solutions that are citizen focused, that are human centric, that really can be scaled, right? So that, you then really look at, okay, how do you invest in those companies? And this is also to Alexander's point. A lot of the companies within the tech ecosystem simply cannot scale because they cannot raise the capital that is required, or they cannot find the human capital that is required in order to take them on that scaling journey. And what happens then is when that money comes from foreign sources, a lot of the time these companies are offshored, and then the technology is no longer technology that can really serve us here, or it is technology that we consume here, but when it comes to taxes, when it comes to talent, it is talent that is not here. It is taxes that don't get paid here simply because the companies have been offshored. So I think that we really need to also look at that component when we talk about capacity development and smart city development, and really look at how do we ensure that that part of funding and ensuring that there is local funding is really taken care of, so that we have sustainable growth within the technology ecosystem to support the vision of Lagos and the vision of having a smart city, and ensure that we can actually accelerate, because there are a lot of smart people within the ecosystem, and I think a lot of them are also ready to work and ready to engage with the government, and partner with the government to ensure that this city is smarter and just more, that the experience of living here is just nicer as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Nkem. And I think Yemi had a point, I believe, on looking at knowledge transfer and backward integration as well. I think just building on your point, Nkem. Yemi, do you want to comment on knowledge transfer?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, my view is that knowledge transfer is definitely critical. I mean, we see it in all aspects of even the jobs that we do on a day-to-day basis, right? So, for example, when I'm, talking to my clients, that's one of the actual critical points that my clients challenge me on, is to say, look, what does the knowledge transfer look like? So, and I think that that's important, that as we build ecosystems, as the ecosystems or ecosystem players continue to thrive within this particular environment, being able to give knowledge back, I think is a critical ingredient to, the whole conversation around how critical talent is, or how talent will become, as we continue to build. Thanks.
Yes, so thank you, Yemi. So I think another point that was made, and I recall this from a vision I had read from the Lagos State Governor, and that was really around innovation and local talent and building local talent. And I recall that at the plenary, this is a point that came up, and I heard Inyi Ola talk about this in terms of how they had built Andela to create some local capacity for code and so on. And there being a dearth of such local talent. So can we talk about what hubs can do? And I heard them talk about how Yaba is one thing, Ekpe is another opportunity. What role does local hubs like that play in terms of creating the entrepreneurship and innovation as the basis for smart cities?
Rich, may I start?
Please.
Okay, great. And before I do, I want to go back to something Nkem said regarding the technology and the development process and building the systems. And I want to go, I want to take us back and say, let's not build systems in isolation. Let's build systems that solve user problems. And I think when and this is where Yemi was speaking to as well, what are the user problems that we need to solve and build technology around it? Because we need to ensure that as Alan is laying that capacity and infrastructure, we have the supply side is building the systems, but we also have the demand side pool. Otherwise, if we have misalignments across those three nodes, we're not going to get to the goals we want to get to. So going back to the role of hubs, I think hubs are very critical in several ways when you look at the whole technology space. And one of the things Ian also said was that, they want to, the tech people want to be respected in the ecosystem, right? So the first thing is that tech people don't dress like you guys, all right? They don't, okay? And then when they walk into any meeting or any conversation, the first thing is that, who is this guy in jeans and a t-shirt? He can't be a serious actor. And that's perception. And we can't blame ourselves for how we sort of label people in that sense. So, but hubs, first of all, they create a community. And in these cases, a lot of these people are working on their own. So they don't have the value of anyone to sort of interact with or rub minds with, is this idea really correct? And they build capacity as well. Because some people have learned to code by reading a book, C++ programming from cover to cover, right? And then they learn better practices, they learn to engage, and then they also have access to corporates, which again, they don't have networks, leverage, right? And how do they build this? So the hub helps them with that community. And then later on, when they have maybe a minimum viable product, the hub might also introduce them to funders, right? Pre-seed and all the different stages. And then also, the hub grooms them. Because there's nothing like peer review and peer evaluation, right? So they get, so it's another informal way of educating and mentoring people, but that structure needs to be there. And then the hub, the basic thing they also give them is the access to workspace. Because one of the biggest challenges that we see in COVID is that even in our universities, some students have had to defer their education because of lack of power. And even though we give data free to all the students or undergrad students, but lack of power is an issue. Lack of a conducive home environment to study in, etc., etc. So the realities are there, but we need to sort of identify them and build the whole ecosystem and let everyone play their roles and play them effectively to ensure that we reach the right outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, and creating a virtuous circle, of course. Thank you. Alexander.
I really wanted to build on that because I thought that was just such an eloquent statement of the role that hubs play. And as I look at the hubs that are most successful, there is an informal and a formal interaction that happens, right? And deliberately creating opportunities where both happen, right? Where you can bump into someone and strike up a conversation, but also where you're introduced to someone that you should know, right? And the hubs should be curated to do both, right? But I think even perhaps equally important is going back to the question of mentorship, is retaining in hubs those who've made it, so to speak, right? And that we want the success stories to be reinvesting financially and their personal capital in that hub, because that's what's then going to build the next cycle and the next generation. So we want to make sure that we're rewarding those who've nailed it, who've hit the home run, and saying, stay in this hub, help build the hub, and get the people who are going to follow you. And so creating, that's where the virtuous cycle really starts to take off. Absolutely.
And actually, we've seen some examples of that. I know that people like Flutterwave and Andela and others started off at Yaba and have continued to support what goes on there. And I'm sure there are many other great examples of success. So yeah, that really resonates with me. I still just want us to talk about one aspect of the soft side of infrastructure and speaking again to a different type of ecosystem, and that is service management. And I think Alan had an excellent point on that, because it's great to have the front end of artificial intelligence, insights, leveraging big data, but that stuff doesn't work on its own. It needs support. So what are your thoughts, Alan, on how we support that front end?
Thanks very much, Veracity. To me, it's a really fundamental thing. Everybody talks about all of the flashy, sexy stuff on how you're going to develop all this innovation and tech and all the front end pieces. And by the way, I do agree, hubs are very important. And just on that point, most telcos and technology companies, especially ours, for example, we're already making sure we're much more than just a dumb pipe. We're not just the comms, but we also provide all the value as an overlay on all of this. And that includes creating innovation areas, sandboxes, test beds for people to come and work with and develop the IoT solutions of the future. So that's all important, but critically, there's not a great deal of point in going back to what we was talking earlier around skills-based training and the types of support. But there's not a lot of point in building this fantastically interconnected city of the future if you don't actually have a workforce that's able to sustain it. And I think that was the point I wanted to make, which is service management of actually the infrastructure once it's deployed, the not so sexy kind of the maintenance side of keeping fiber running when there's fiber cuts, of keeping poles in the air and keeping diesel generators fueled if electricity is still an issue. All of the support infrastructure that goes with all of that needs to be massively uprated as well. So I would hate for everyone's focus to be on how do we engage and deal with all these tech hubs and everybody can do AI and VR and all the beautiful future stuff if we also don't train a workforce that's able to maintain it. That's the main thing I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alan. So what I thought we could do before we just kind of wrap up with some final thoughts is just perhaps give Lagosians who are listening a sense of what are the other use cases that we can envisage. I mean, Alexander started with the whole traffic one, which is very dear to the heart of anyone who lives in Lagos and has had to try and get to the airport and miss a flight. So we spoke about traffic, we've spoken about health. I gave some examples of travel, of also paying taxes seamlessly. Other use cases, and also thinking about some of the things that have already happened. For example, I think of the digital identity we have in Nigeria. We don't call it that, but it's every bit on par with what you have in India and in Sweden, the fact that we have the BVN and the NIM, right? What can that do? How can we leverage that in terms of future? And what are the other use cases that you may have seen elsewhere that we can start to inspire Lagosians with in terms of what can happen in the city?
Automatic meter reading systems is a very big one that's been around for quite a while and well deployed. It's already starting to be deployed in Nigeria. So as a use case, for example, I worked on many years ago a solution that was basically tied electricity with water consumption. So we had monitoring systems that were monitoring buildings, homes, whatever, that if it was nighttime and there were no lights on, but water was running, therefore there was a leak somewhere, so you could shut the water down to the property so that it conserved resources. Same with lights and sensors around PIR, and if you've got ACs running throughout a building, but there's actually nobody in the building, shut them down. There's so many benefits around that can be done. As a use case example. I'm going to ignore the whole comment around NIN and other type subjects.
Well, that's a great one. I heard an example at the plenary about, can you imagine applying for a passport and not ever leaving your house or your office because you have a digital ID that's national, that's identified, that that is safe, that you can do all your government business sitting in the comfort of your home or office. So
I think it's great.
Nice one to talk
as
about.
well. I'm more focused on the front end of how do you actually get that captured in the first place? How do you get all your biometrics, your retina scan? How does all of that happen to be then stored? Once it's stored, I 100% agree with you. Fantastic. You then need, but then, you know, the conversations around SIMs at the moment and SIM registration. Even when you have a NIN, for example, and you come in and maybe you're on a different operator's network and you want to transfer to mine or even transfer from mine to a different operator, there still needs to be validation. So there will still be things like, you know, unless you're sitting at home with your PC with a fingerprint pad on your PC, that you can actually enter your fingerprint at that point. And again, there still needs to be kind of physical work done here to avoid fraud. So there's a lot of complications that we still have to get over with all of that. So it gets to the point where it is, as you say, seamless and everyone can just sit at home and not interact. Which, by the way, that's another issue. We shouldn't not interact.
I think it's pretty amazing that we're in 2021 and just globally, the idea of a paperless government is still radical.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
It's just amazing, right? Can you imagine running a business where everything has to be on paper, right? It's just, it's mind-boggling, but that's where the whole world is still, right? So that might be cutting edge and still beyond the pale. But there's a number of technologies that are totally practical right now that if there was that data layer we've been talking about and some of the skills should be so much a part of lives, right? I'm thinking about personalized learning, for example, and augmenting what could happen in a classroom with technology-enabled targeted literacy, numeracy development, right? And using that depends on data, depends on the availability of devices, but it also depends on the teachers who can then integrate that into the in-person curriculum. Right, for school kids. So there's personalized learning, and I think that's really exciting to augment the type of things our children can learn. I think another one is we think about behavioral science and nudge is thinking about pushing for public health and sustainable behaviors and using whether it's text message or other really small little nudges to change how people treat preventative healthcare measures, right? Whether that's annual checkups or getting their kids to go to the doctor, little things like that. Or as you were dealing with a global plastic, overwhelming plastic, I don't even know what the right word is. There are now a lot of little nudges around sanitation that change people's behavior on using things that are a waste stream, but instead creating circular economy. So I see those little nudges happening. And government can be creating a framework that happens, but a lot of the nudges can come directly from social sector partners and private partners if government is creating a framework that's encouraging that to happen.
Great, thank you.
I have one.
So,
can you unmute me?
We've looked at many different ideas. So,
I have one. Sorry, I was muted.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so the one I have is insurance, and I think it's an interesting one because when you look at our auto insurance industry, where we have comprehensive versus third-party insurance, and the more popular one is the third-party insurance. But then again, why do I want to buy comprehensive insurance when I'm only moving within a 50-kilometer radius, right? Why do I need to cover the entire Nigeria and pay more? So why can't I have user-based insurance that really calculates what I pay based on where I go, what I use, and then the day I want to go to Ibadan or go to Ekpe or wherever, then they can charge me for that trip. Yeah. And the technology is available, but it's just how do we join the dots and put the pieces together? But again, putting the people at the middle. What do the people want? What's more convenient for the people? And then using behavioral theories and tests to actually test what works and what doesn't work. And I think adoption will increase when we have more basically heterogeneous solutions and user-centric solutions that would actually get people to realize that this is a product for me. Thank you.
No, I think that's a great point, just-in-time insurance, because Nigeria is less than 1% insured. So if people then find that they can curate the insurance they need, and it's not going to be that costly, then hopefully adoption goes up. So other visions, other things to inspire negotiations with.
Yes, Iriti, I just wanted to add something, and I think we've all sort of talked about improving the living experience of people, right? Which means that lifestyle plays a really big role. And that then, sort of feeds into recreational spaces, community spaces, right? And really using smart city infrastructure to actually build those communal spaces and reintegrate them back into our lives, right? So when I hear my parents talk about, sort of the Lagos of their own youth, right? They had parks, the beach was like walking distance accessible. These are experiences that I would love to have, that my child would love to have, right? And I'm sure that there are many, many other citizens that would love to have these same type of experiences, and really putting that at the heart of urban planning and how we actually plan spaces, right? We don't really have a lot of parks. The few parks that are available, some of them are well maintained, but then there's, still the aspect of safety. So how do you also cater to, improving lifestyle? There are a lot of people who, go cycling and running. We don't have cycling paths. We don't have running tracks. So, runners are forced to be either on the pavement that is a lot of the time not there, or uneven. So they run on the roads, right, which is dangerous. There's a lot of, people who've got hit by cars. There's people who have, been robbed while they're running. So I think that, just taking into consideration also how lifestyles have evolved and how lifestyles have changed, and ensuring that that is really an integral part of how we plan our cities. Like Yinka said, really putting the people at the center and ensuring that we're building what people really want in terms of infrastructure, and in terms of, those communal spaces that really allow us to decentralize some of how Lagos has been, sort of set up and built, right? If you had the same type of restaurants in Ikorodu that you have in VI, you would have less traffic on the weekend of people just simply wanting to go to a particular restaurant, right? And you'd have less commuting happening because people are like, well, I can go down the road. Why am I going so far, right? So I think it's really, sort of thinking about how do we also take lifestyle into consideration when we're, talking about smart cities, because a lot of the time you think about smart cities, you talk about, the technology, the infrastructure, and all of that, but lifestyle really is the heart of every smart city development.
And people are, of course. I'm mindful that we're 3 minutes away from our deadline, so I want to move to the last question and perhaps ask Alan, Yemi, and Alexander to give their final thoughts on this last question. And this is, we've been talking about, in some cases, almost a dystopian future, facial recognition. We've also brought it back a little bit and spoken generally about digital transformation. But what about the evolutionary journey? What about just what are the next steps, right? How do we get there? And if I can just ask that we conclude on next steps. From perhaps Alan, if you wouldn't mind a thought on next steps, Yemi, and then.
Thanks. I'll talk more about the hard elements again. Next steps for me are very much around making sure that we can deploy the communications infrastructure. That's the building blocks for everything that we're talking about. And then I think it's a case of that there should be a citywide plan around how do you then build on that and leverage on that, looking at all the different verticals and seeing what are the low-hanging fruit that can deliver the biggest amount of return for the biggest percentage of the population of Lagos State. That's what I would like to see happen.
Thank you. Yemi? Oh, please can we unmute Yemi? Or maybe Alexander can start while Yemi gets unmuted.
So I think I just take a bite at what it, oh, sorry.
No, it's fine, Alexander, please go ahead.
So I'd say just take a bite at what's that data center of excellence in government. So is it around the traffic? Is it around the ID card? Is it around health? Pick one very specific area and do the whole thing around it. So data portal, so that people can see the data, so that as a resident or as an entrepreneur, or as a government employee, have access to data, and it's quality data, and then create some of these data storytellers inside the agencies who are going to unlock the power of that data. And this is a totally doable short-term step. And if it's done right, it's going to create the appetite to continue into the other areas and really expand to an enterprise-wide capacity.
Great, thank you, Alexander.
All right,
Before
so
we talk, we have to remember he's a consultant. Is he now going to charge us for his time?
no, Alan, I'll do that afterwards.
Okay. Just wanted to be clear. Thanks.
So I think we can all agree that the pandemic has certainly impacted sort of every aspect of society. I mean, education, sort of the way we all work, even this particular event, right? So I think I read somewhere that that 2020 is probably the greatest digital transformation year in history, because everyone globally, adapted quite nicely to digital interactions, right? So I think for me, if I had to sort of talk about sort of the low-hanging fruits, and I think it's really just accepting. I think the future is essentially here now, and we all need to just accept. And we need to be bold in terms of the types of ideas, in terms of how we interact. So if I end with 3 points, I'd say, look, one, if you look at digital is woven into every fabric of our everyday lives, and we must accept that going forward. Technology has become so ubiquitous, and digital transformation, or in terms of digital, touches each and every one of us in very, very truly unique ways. And I think going forward, we must break the traditional mindset, and we must accept that the future is here. Thank you, Reddy.
Okay, Ireti, sorry, just before, I was asked to tell you that there's some questions in the panel or something or the other, but before we do that, I also want to add something, and this is also the mindset of all of us as Lagosians. The state belongs to each and every one of us, so how do we ensure we keep each other safe, and we keep the infrastructure that we're building also safe and secure? Because if we don't begin to change that mindset, we can't grow and we can't evolve. So we're going to start and stop and start and stop, because like Alan said, critical infrastructure. What Alan didn't say is that sometimes they even have their batteries and things like that stolen and removed from the cell sites, okay? So we have to be mindful that what we're trying to do is a common good and a public good for everybody, but we all need to contribute either in securing it and ensuring that it's available for everyone's use. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know how much time, we're already over. You said there's some questions, so do we have time to take them, or what is the recommendation?
No, I don't think we have any more time to take them, so we'll probably just have to answer them offline.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Do any of the panelists have any final comments to make who haven't already spoken before we wrap it up?
Thank you so much, Ireti. Fantastic moderation.
Thank you. I really liked your quote, and I know it's from Gibson. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So we'll end there.
Yes,
we're going to get there soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.